Hey everybody, this is Sarek
and Joyce
with Adventure Done Right, and today's video is all about driving on the other side of the road for those of you from the States and other countries that typically drive on the right side of the road. What it's like, what you can expect, and what you kind of need to plan for. Today we are driving in Scotland. Right now we are in Isle of Skye, which is the northern part of Scotland, and we are driving a Mini Cooper country van. And avoid those bikers. So
you think your lane is small back home. When you're sharing it with the bikers, the lanes here are even smaller.
Right. So the first thing you need to know about driving on the opposite side of the road, or driving in other countries in particular, is that the roadways are much smaller. So in the States especially, we have very wide lanes. We've got lanes you could basically park a car sideways and still have room in them. Here, because the cities are a lot older, a lot of them were cobblestone streets beforehand and they basically paved over them or cemented over them, then you end up with these very narrow lanes. So to make up for that, the cars of course are slightly smaller. Now that doesn't mean that every vehicle you drive is going to be a clown-sized car, but they're not going to be your standard giant SUV. If you get an SUV over here, it's going to be a 80% of the size of what a normal SUV is to kind of compensate for the smaller roadways. So you're going to find yourself probably driving and it's going to look like you're not going to be able to make it through a narrow intersection, or there's going to be a car on the opposite side of the lane and you're going to think to yourself, I'm going to hit that car or drive off into the ditch. Probably not the case. And that brings me kind of to my second point. Your viewpoint is a little bit off when you're driving in the opposite seat that you're used to. Normally I'd be sitting where Joyce is, and that would be where my steering is and pedals and so on and so forth. But over here, in many European countries and other countries as well, you're driving in what would normally be the passenger seat. Everything else is the same for you. Your stick shift and things like that is in the center for changing all of your gears. Everything else works the same. Your foot pedals aren't reversed or anything like that. It's just you're sitting in the driver's seat, which can be a little bit unnerving because you're very close to the oncoming traffic and you're kind of not in the position that you're used to. But honestly, you get used to it. I've driven now in a couple of countries. I've driven in Cyprus, which is an island in the Mediterranean. I've driven in England, and I've driven in Scotland, and Australia, and New Zealand. So I've had my fair share of driving, but honestly, it really hasn't been that difficult. It takes you a couple minutes to kind of get used to it, but the best way I tell people to get acquainted with the driving is, first off, get comfortable. Don't start off in a major city and just say, great, I'm going to just go on the interstate right there. Find yourself some quiet roads if you can, or some streets that don't seem very busy, and just kind of go up and down them a couple times, allowing maybe a car or two to pass by you, just until you kind of feel comfortable with it, if you've got any nerves about it. But the best way to kind of line yourself up so that you know that you're not veering off the road, because the biggest challenge for me was your line of sight is typically close to the edge of the road when you're driving in what would be your normal driver's seat position back home in the States. This is the opposite of it. So what you want to do is forget that you're in a car and just picture where you would be if you were to be walking down the road in the passenger seat, which is now the driver's seat position. And so you're going to line your seat just to the left of the dotted line or the line in the center of the roadway, and just kind of picture yourself running along the road right next to that white line or yellow line, whatever it may be in the country you're in, and you'll find that actually it's not that difficult. So just kind of line yourself up with that and you'll be okay. And so that kind of gets you past that first initial hurdle of how am I actually going to do this. The next thing, and this is probably the most difficult thing about driving on the opposite side of the road than what you're used to. It's not the turn signals, it's not anything like that. It's actually the small little things. Once you learn how to drive and you've been driving for a number of years, everything becomes automatic. You don't think about it anymore. You make turns, you go through lights, etc., and you just do it out of habit. And so when you're on the opposite side of the road, breaking those habits makes you have to do a little bit more mental work. So the biggest thing that I'll tell you to be careful for is making turns. Because when you turn, first off, you can't do a right on red because traffic goes in the opposite direction. I know, get your head wrapped around that, but it does work. And then when you're making turns, just be mindful that you don't turn into oncoming traffic. Sounds like a really silly thing for me to say, but trust me, I've done it multiple times, or almost ran into traffic multiple times. And it's basically, when you go to make a right-hand turn, you want to naturally turn into the closest lane to you because you're used to making that right on red or that right turn with the lane that's closest to you. But when you make a right-hand turn here, you have to go around that lane to the far edge of traffic. So that's probably the most difficult thing. So honestly, when you're driving overseas, you'll get used to it very quickly, and it's not really that big of a deal. The controls are just in the opposite seat. Just remember, line yourself up with the inside road line, like you were just kind of floating along in that direction there. And just be really mindful of your driving. You just have to pay attention a little bit more than you normally would, and other than that, really, you'll be fine. And I think that's pretty much it. Joyce, did you have anything else to add?
I do. A couple other quick things that you can keep in mind is normally there is a country speed limit or a city speed limit, and you can travel along that. But as you come upon small towns, they'll usually have a sign or a flashing sign just to let you know to slow down in town, because you may come across some signs that have little speed cameras on them, and that's a big thing for over here. We haven't seen many state police or officers or police law enforcement writing and doing tickets because they have so many cameras. So we just want to remind you that when you see a little sign that looks like that, no, you should be slowing down, because you're usually coming upon a town where your speed needs to match that area.
Yeah, and that actually is a great point. I'm glad you brought that up. The first time I ever drove overseas was in England, and in the States and in many countries, honestly, that don't have speed cameras set up that auto ticket you. If you see a police officer and they're doing radar and things like that, if the speed limit was 55 miles an hour and you're going 58, they're not going to pull you over. They're not going to even care about it so much. They're going to let you keep going. Over here, the ticketing is automatic. It's not just in Scotland, it's in England, it's kind of all over Europe. And so when you see those speed cameras, if you are over the speed limit, you will get a ticket. You'll get a ticket, and here's the big thing about it. When you fly home, you'll get a ticket like a month later. So the first time that I was overseas in England, I racked up a lot of tickets. It was over $1,000, and part of it was that the tickets were maybe $500 because it was multiple tickets, and I just kept getting hit with the cameras, only going a few miles over the speed limit, and I kept getting the tickets racked up. But the problem is, I was in a rental car. So they first billed Enterprise, which was the rental car company, and then Enterprise said it's not us, and they forward you the tickets, and they mail you the tickets. By the time I got the tickets, it was over the payment date of 30 days, which meant that I was double fined because I was now late on that ticket that I didn't even know I got. So take a lesson from my errors and don't do what I did. Be very cautious of your speed. And honestly, when I got those tickets, I was in cities where it was 30 miles an hour and I was going 33. It's not like I was going 80 and a 50 or something like that. Generally, when you're overseas, you want to be mindful of your driving anyway. And if you're not sure of the speed limit, drive slow. Drive for what you feel comfortable with, that you think it would be. If you're in a small village and you're not sure and you were just going 60 miles an hour and you're like, if this was my home, I wouldn't be going 60. Don't go 60. The worst case scenario is you're going to have traffic backed up behind you, and you can always pull over and let cars pass you. Don't feel intimidated by other vehicles on the road. You're a tourist.
The locals,
it's okay.
The locals here in the town, they seem to be pretty aware that you're traveling through and kind about it. So you'll see there are a lot of pullover passes where either if you feel like you're traveling too slow or holding up traffic, you go into a pull-off, or you see another car coming on direction and they will pull off to the side with the roads being so thin.
Yeah.
And such.
So one last tip quickly before we go. We don't want this video to get too long for you guys. But remember that when you are traveling abroad, a lot of cars are manual. So if you don't do well with stick shift, ask for an automatic vehicle. They usually can provide them at a lot of the rental car companies, but just make sure that is something you bring up. You don't want to find yourself over here in a rental where they're only a stick shift and you're not familiar with that. But that's it, I think, for this video. I think it's kind of long enough, but hopefully this is helpful to you guys. And remember to leave a comment down below with maybe some of your driving experiences or where you're headed. We always like to get feedback from our subscribers and what other videos you think we should be doing. So like, comment, subscribe, and remember, it's a great big world out there, so never stop adventuring. Thanks.